What is up, my tribal people? Welcome back to another episode clip of Pre the Podcast. And just a reminder that these are only shortened clips. And if you want to listen to the full episode where we talk about way more, make sure you click the first link in the description below. Or alternatively, you can type in Pre the Podcast on all your audio listening platforms. And if you want to keep up with what goes on behind the scenes, make sure you follow our Instagram at Pre the Podcast. And now with that out of the way, I'll catch you guys on the other side.
So I started experimenting with Yam. I think everyone always asks me why I use Yam, and it very much is like, I was just, like I said, I had this assignment. I was thinking about race, and my mum always used to say, "Oh, if you're bad at school, if you're bad, I'm going to send you back to the Caribbean to plant yam." And I was like, right.
That one's.
So I started to think about what it would feel like to also go back to, like, say, the native lands, and yam became this metaphor, and I literally just clung to it.
You are now listening to Breathe the Podcast with your host, Majaro.
Welcome back to Breathe the Podcast. You guys already know what I'm going to say. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Because we're trying to get to 100 subscribers before the end of the year. And by sharing this with your friends and family, that goes a long way in helping us do that. And now, let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Breathe the Podcast. I'm your host, Nacheal Catnott. It's been a weird couple of days, I'm not going to lie. But we're back with our regular scheduled programming. And today, joining me is a very special guest. A very busy one at that. It's Nacheal Catnott. Shots. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Very well.
Good. Obviously, we're living in the South, Reading and New London. It's been a weird couple of days after, Queen Lizzie, second of her name, dearly departed Queen. Wow. I'm not gonna lie. The world, dare I say it, is reeling. How have you been? How have you been through this period?
I think it's interesting. I think being in London, it's definitely kind of more obvious the changes that are happening. Just basic things like transport being a bit busier, a lot of things being cancelled, a lot of cultural events being cancelled, sadly, to kind of mark the morning.
Yeah.
I think, it's been very, definitely a change. It's a historic moment. I feel like, at least in my lifetime, we won't have like another queen on the throne. So, to kind of have like another man in power is interesting.
Another straight white male.
But yeah, I guess a lot has just changed. I think 2022 is just proven to be the year of change, especially predominantly in the UK. We've got a new Prime Minister.
Female. Big up.
Not big up, but definitely big up. Just no comment. But yeah, and we're in like the biggest kind of economic housing crisis, energy, kind of rates are soaring,
everything's just going up.
I think everything's kind of in a spiral, so it'd be interesting to see how we adapt in this time. And as artists and activists, I think it's important to have, well, first of all, moments of reflection, and also use our practice to kind of, whether that's advocate or document, and just kind of continue being present and vocal. I think it's really important.
Yeah, like, just obviously with everything, like you said, everything being cancelled. That's at the start I was like, they cancelled my football. Like, this is getting cancelled. But at the same time, I did appreciate it once everything dropped for me. Once the penny dropped, because when I found out, it was like in the middle of going to a football game, and I was like, and my girlfriend Charlotte called me. She's like, "Oh, the Queen's passed away." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then started playing football. But then after a couple of days, and when I was supposed to be watching football, but instead I was, flicked on Sky News for the first time in ages, and the whole, royal themed, coverage, I was like, wow, she's actually gone. Yeah. But on the bright side, we got you today. And we're going to talk about, your journey in this film and entertainment industry. Let's start off by where are you actually from? Like, I know you're from London, but, you know, we talked earlier and you said you're from the Caribbean.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because so I'm an artist and filmmaker, and I also work in broadcast television, post-factual and drama as an assistant producer and researcher. And it's interesting you asked that specific question because a lot of my work as an artist is about identity and predominantly the question, where do you come from? So my very early investigations around race and identity were literally simply asking people that question. So in the UK, I feel like it's really interesting because I was starting to analyse my identity while I was actually studying abroad in Canada, where a lot of people were referring to me as African American, which was quite confusing for me because I've got very, what I feel like is thick South London British accent. So it kind of started making me realise about these terminology and, you know, the kind of reference to people being maybe more polite or using certain types of language when it comes to race. So I very much started off doing a simple kind of exercise of kind of like questionnaires, asking people where they came from. And I found in the UK, especially, you know, people of colour, our first, you know, almost reply is like, what do you mean? Do you mean as in place in the UK or do you mean as in country? So
yeah, like even when I asked you the question, I said, I know you're from London, but...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's almost, there's always that extra layer when it comes to, you know, people of colour. So for me, I refer to myself in terms of, I guess, definition on a formal piece of paper as British, Black British Caribbean. I would probably never, unless very casually, refer to myself as English. I don't feel English, which I think is very interesting, especially during this time with the Queen. A lot of things with regards to, you know, belonging and feeling, you know, a part of the society is definitely something that is starting to shape the conversation. So, yeah, like I said, I'd say Black British Caribbean. I grew up, you know, very much linked to my Caribbean heritage. My parents are Jamaican and Dominican, French-speaking Dominican, not the Republic, just to clarify.
Just stating it for the facts.
Just stating the facts, because a lot of people don't realise that there's two.
I didn't know until you just mentioned it then.
So there's French-speaking in Dominica and, you know, Spanish-speaking Dominican Republic, which is close to Haiti. So, yeah, I've always grown up, you know, kind of with a very strong Caribbean influence, whether that's with food, whether that's with, you know, just general cultural things, predominantly music. So, yeah, I think it's a big part of, obviously, my identity is identifying as Caribbean. But I also, you know, since kind of making more investigations into race and culture, I have, you know, began to be able to identify with the wider diaspora as, you know, someone of, you know, African descent, and I do agree with that. I believe that. So I'm kind of also learning a lot about, you know, what it means to be, you know, connected to Africa and African history.
Would you say that that's been becoming a more recent, you know, phenomena of, you know, people from the diaspora who are, for example, African American or from the Caribbean, who are actually going into Nigeria or into places in Africa or trying to find out more about the African heritage and realizing that they're not just from this island or this continent?
Yeah, well, obviously being predominantly like Jamaican, for example, definitely growing up, it was seen as like the ideal kind of like, you know, place to come from as a Black person. I remember, you know, friends telling me who are, you know, of African heritage that they would pretend that they're Jamaican. There was a lot of kind of, you know, discrimination within the community towards African people. However, I think now what I'm finding really interesting is this kind of like new wave of, I would say almost like politicization of people of color, whether that's, you know, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, whether that's because of just the, you know, the use of new terminology like white privilege or different, you know, even just the use of the term people of color, or all these different kind of, you know, kind of terms or logistical things that we have now that has grown due to the, you know, the development of our society. Yeah,
you got biracial now, so, you know, widening the spectrum a bit more.
I think there's this general kind of, you know, unity starting to happen between, you know, Black people, predominantly Black people in the Caribbean, like I said, more identifying with the African diaspora, you know, whether that's through art or even print or clothing, music, which I think is amazing. I think that's really good. And there seems to be this kind of like, I would say the beginning of this unity between, you know, like people really becoming more connected to blackness on a whole, rather than as these separate entities of Caribbean or, you know, African, etc. So
I feel like a lot of, you know, a few Black celebrities, whether they're big or they're small, have really tried to make a point of going back home. I know Akon, obviously, is probably one of the most famous person who's doing stuff with, you know, Uganda, Ghana. Another person is Jadena. The classic man. Everyone knows him as the classic man, guy with the dapper suits. He's, you know, originally from Nigeria, but he's also making inroads in Ghana, and obviously Nigeria as well.
I think we're at a time also, I think, where, you know, the rise of whether it's like Black-owned businesses or the Black coin, all these things seem to be, you know, very much taken off, you know, whether that's kind of looking at more people buying, you know,
Black-owned businesses.
Exactly, or, you know, kind of like investment into Black business, I think is really important. And I think it's also, you know, just there's a few little kind of other movements, like whether that's like natural hair movements, again, movements into like, you know, whether it's like equality for like, you know, Black makeup or representation in, you know, find all those kind of different things, or representation
in fashion,
you know, on
movies.
Screen, exactly. Just those kind of things I think is very interesting. You know, the biggest debate that's kind of happening at the moment is this, you know, the Little Mermaid video.
Oh my gosh, I literally watched a video on that today.
Mermaid trailer, sorry, and the Little Mermaid film that's going to be coming out, and it's just hilarious that you've got. I saw a meme that was just like, there's grown men genuinely, like racism. There's grown men that's genuinely, you know, upset about a Little Mermaid, and it's like, you know, people say not my Ariel and all these. Really, like.
Did you say not my Moses too? Did anyone say that?
Stuff like, so it's very interesting, and it's just an interesting time, I think, because as much as again, I'm very much here for seeing the Black Ariel, I'm very much here for seeing the Black Cinderella, or all these different, you know, Black Panther, all these different kind of references, but we also need to, you know, also think about, you know, TikTok culture and, you know, kind of like the exoticization of Blackness by people who are not necessarily from within the community, profiting off, say, whether it's our goods, our knowledge, music, our wealth, our experiences, our art and culture. So that's also like a thin line we also have to think about.
And the key thread amongst that, I feel like, is obviously ownership. Obviously owning your own business, owning your own music, owning your own intellectual property.
Exactly, and it's really interesting you say that, because I actually studied art and philosophy. That was my degree, and my dissertation is in historical political philosophy, and essentially that's talking about, you know, the development of ownership, the development of property, and how one comes to own something, you know, starting with a very kind of natural law theory of religion, and, you know, natural lawyers would say that we have the right to ownership because God wants us to preserve ourselves, etc. And, you know, like philosophers like Locke go on to say things like, if one labours on something, that's how they become to own something. So again, when we look at, my dissertation was all about, you know, looking at cultural ownership and intellectual property from an artist's perspective, but also from a cultural perspective, is the reason as to why Aboriginal status, or, you know, slavery and etc. is such a wrong. Is it because, you know, in those places said people laboured on that land and it became theirs and it was theirs to flourish? So there's all those questions, and I think one of the biggest problems, I would say, predominantly in this country, and probably more within the Caribbean community than I would say than the African community, not to like make segregation, but is that this ideology of equity and ownership is something that we struggle with, which is something that is a kind of, you know, a response or the reasons as to why, you know, like it's a problem with institutionalized racism. So again, we're a kind of, you know, equity and ownership is something that we don't necessarily see ourselves in, or we don't have the position, we're not in the privilege always to, you know, have that. And I think equity and property and ownership of your own things is essentially the key to wealth and the key to power. And that's what you see, you know, amongst kind of, you know, more privileged communities.
Why would you say, you know, the Caribbean culture isn't conducive to that type of ownership?
Because again, you've got very lot.
Obviously, you've got history of slavery and
exactly, but I think with, and I don't know whether it's, and this is my opinion, I really want to highlight this is my opinion, that often, you know, there's a lot of businesses that and trade and, you know, knowledge of wealth within Africa, and just the way that I believe African maybe children are grown up as maybe a more economic kind of way of seeing the world. Okay. I don't know if that's because
I would say there's some truth to that, because
there's some truth to that, and I think it might be because ultimately, despite what happened with obviously slavery, and despite what's happening with, you know, some of the difficult issues that are still obviously faced within Africa, there's still this element of it being the motherland. There's still this element of, you know, coming from princes and kings and queens and kind of knowing elements of your lineage. Whereas, like, I think in maybe the Caribbean or people that have migrated into different cultures, we don't necessarily see ourselves in those positions.
Okay. I feel like
theory, and that's essentially maybe why we kind of end up in the cycle more so, and kind of more affected by institutionalized racism and systematic oppression.
I agree with that, because in Africa, everything's there. You already know that's yours. You already have a sense of ownership of the land, you know, the animals there. You know that's your place. That's where you belong. But obviously when you go, or you're born in, for example, Jamaica or Haiti or somewhere, you know that's not your traditional homeland where your people come from and reside, and, you know, had families and things were passed on, and, you know, traditions unique to your area in that place.
100%. The tradition, I believe you have traditions and you have ownership, but I think just there's just more kind of infiltration from colonial rule in much of the Caribbean, and I think that's where the issues can often arise. But again, that's just my opinion, and that's not I'm not like, it would take a PhD for me to completely articulate that well.
So would you say finding out about your history and finding out about these stories, would you say that influenced you into, you know, trying to capture more stories like that, or tell stories that might not have been, you know, broadcast or publicized as much as, you know, some other types of stories? And was this always the plan for you? Did you always think about filmmaking and, you know, being an artist? Was that always the plan for you, going to study in university?
So I'm dyslexic, very dyslexic. So I feel like I always used art as an outlet. I was very creative. It was like my best subject at school. So I always knew from a young age, I was always doing kind of more of the creative things from, you know, from being a child, sorry. And I think it's, you know, art's allowed me to express myself in a way that's not necessarily always screaming from the rooftops, which again, I'm very much also known for doing, but it just allows me to channel some of like my, whether it's frustrations or political views, into something that I feel like can be maybe digested in a different, more articulate way. In terms of it always being the plan, I think, like I said, I've always been interested in something creative. And that was kind of just reinforced through studying art. In terms of film, so when I first started, kind of, I guess, my art practice was more to do with femininity. That might have, I think, had a lot to do with the fact that I went to a girls' school. You know, that was kind of the subject or the kind of, you know, environment I was placed in. So it was easy to make responses about that. I kind of got to art school, got to my foundation year at Reading, and kind of realised I was doing stuff that felt quite repetitive, quite one note. You know, kind of felt like I was almost like copying artists before me, very influenced by the likes of Tracy Emin and Sarah Lucas and Jenny Saville, but it kind of felt like obviously those names had already done, you know, what I was almost doing. So it kind of felt, like I said, felt very repetitive. I then went to Vancouver, and it was just a very different environment in terms of the way they teach predominantly fine art. It's very much a bit more strict, a bit more kind of like you go to a plain class, whereas like art school in the UK or in Europe tends to be a bit more about, you know, you developing as an artist and your autonomy and you kind of like spreading your wings and kind of doing your own thing. Okay. So I kind of, because of my dyslexia, I kind of thrive in structure, predominantly academic wise. So I had Vancouver kind of ignited that structure of working. And then, like I said, I was just starting to explore identity and culture. And when I got back from Vancouver, we had an assignment to kind of, you know, do a show. All the people that went away for study abroad to do a show that kind of made reference to, you know, their time away, and mine was about looking at obviously race. So I started experimenting with Yam. I think everyone always asks me why I use Yam, and it very much is like I was just, like I said, I had this assignment. I was thinking about race, and I just always used to kind of think about this. I want to say joke. It felt very serious at the time. My mum always used to say, "Oh, if you're bad at school, or if you're bad, I'm going to send you back to the Caribbean to plant yam." And I was like, right,
that one's.
So I started to think about what it would feel like to also to go back to, like, say, the native lands, and you know, yam became this metaphor, and I literally just clung to it. So I was, you know, using it in a sculptural form. And then I was also really interested in, you know, like kind of having these dialogues with my granddad and my aunt, both of the Windrush generation, both who migrated to this country as young people, interested in their struggles, interested in, you know, like what it was like in Britain for people of colour back then, where the similarities lie between, you know, the history and where we are now, for people of colour, for Black people predominantly. So I started doing these kind of interviews with them, and that kind of, you know, started taking this documentary style. And I was also wanting to like merge that with my sculptures and with these kind of like performative and more poetic elements. So it became kind of like this mismatch of kind of like experimental filmmaking. And despite having all these different colour elements, whether that's the sculpture, the poetry, sound, film for me is what essentially aligns everything together. I think, again, from being dyslexic, maybe it's just I'm such a visual
person.
I am just a visual learner. That is my learning style. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, my brain just thinks, okay, I want to tackle these, you know, kind of difficult issues. I want to kind of have these, you know, very experimental and more kind of abstract elements. Okay, how can I balance that? Right, okay, film is my, you know, whether I use it as a form of documentation or whether I use it as just a general genre. That's always what happened, and I kind of only really came to the realization of that towards the end of my BA. So then I was like, okay, you know, I've got that. I feel like I've got the ideas. I feel like I've got the creativity, but I don't really have what feels like the technical skills, because Reading was quite a small art school, so we didn't really have, you know, all this state of art equipment, facilities. So I started to do an MA at Goldsmiths in documentary filmmaking. At the time, I just like taught myself how to use Premiere Pro on YouTube, you know, like I said, very kind of like basic self-taught technical ability. So that really gave me the opportunity to, you know, be using like state-of-the-art cameras, lighting, and be trained professionally in editing. So that's kind of where the shift kind of changed. And then, you know, I was exposed to film on a broader scale through doing the course. And then I applied for a scheme that was a kind of entry-level scheme into television. And that's when everything kind of steered towards the kind of television side of things.
So was that through a company or?
Yeah, so it's called The Network. It's a great scheme. It's run by the Edinburgh Television Festival. It's kind of like a week-long program whereby you and like 60 other people who are eager to get into television are like
proper X Factor-ish.
throw the deep end. You kind of almost choose a pathway. So there was my year there was like drama, news, live shows. What was the other one? But yeah, you get to just kind of like, different parts, and you kind of get mentors from different parts of the industry. So because I'd spent the year doing documentary as my MA, I decided to take drama, and I worked with like the cast and crew of Casualty, and we, like made like a 7-minute episode, and we got like mentorship. We worked as a team. You kind of literally what it says on the tin, like start creating this network, and Edinburgh Television Festival is like prestigious. It's like where like it's like a hub of like everyone from like all different companies from top to more junior level. So you really get this like buzz of the festival, and they do masterclasses and insights. So that was really exciting for me, and that's when I was like, okay, I really want to go into television. I actually wanted to go into drama. I found it quite difficult to start with because I had the documentary masters. I was making the work in terms of my portfolio that I could show 10 was more of a documentary style format. So because of that, I did like a year. I managed to get like a year-long runner's receptionist job at a company who kind of did more hybrid work. So they were a documentary company, but they did like drama recon, and they did a bit more kind of like that style of thing. So, and that kind of was like my foot into television. Being a receptionist is probably one of the best ways, I would say, getting into television, because you know everyone, and because the television works quite a fast turnover. So for example, it's very rare, especially in an independent company, for people to be like staff. So, which I didn't really realize. I just assumed I was going to get this job and work there for 20 years, like my mum. That's not how it works. So this freelance kind of model is very very common, and what that means is like like someone might be working like the company for like a month, and then they'll go to another company. But if you're like that's a contact you've got. So if they go to another company, then you might be like, hey, can you introduce me to this company? So that's kind of how like the kind of ripple effect happens. And yeah, like being on a reception desk, you just see everyone who comes in to the office. You are the one, their first point of call. You make their teas and coffees. You're like a familiar face. So it's actually one of the best jobs to have had starting out, and people always remember you, especially if you've got a name like mine. Many people forget my name because it's quite different. So that was really useful. And
if we get a massive influx of receptionists coming into central London looking for jobs, we're blaming you.
Well, to be fair, but then again, it's quite niche to have, not niche, but quite rare to have a year-long runner's job. It's probably a bit more common now, where things have become changed a bit in terms of the way people are working because of COVID. But
so what would you say your runner is for people who don't know?
Okay, so a runner is someone who literally kind of does the running around. I guess that's maybe the easiest way to kind of like explain it as an explanation.
So getting like the tea, the coffees, the beverages,
you might be
towels.
Yeah, you might be responsible for booking couriers or running drives to edits. I did a lot of that, running drives to edits, getting people's lunch, ordering taxis or deliveries. Post run, I did a post run. I think like 3 times a day at one point, twice a day, things like that. It's very different. Again, in the office setting, it's a bit more of like the admin kind of stuff. So whether that's like making sure everyone's got stationery, or like making sure desks are clean, or making sure people their emails are set up, and all these kind of things, and and helping the office staff with maybe planning events, or just being present in the office. On location, a runner probably again is more on helm to help the crew when on location. So again, that's probably organising lunches, travel, equipment, carrying equipment, shadowing the director to see if they need anything. So it kind of does vary from kind of like being on set to being in an office space. So yeah, I did that for a year, and then I went freelance. My first freelance job was at BBC Studios
Jeez.
as junior researcher.
Oh, so would you say that was your first break into like a
Yeah, so
more than entry role?
yeah, so I was in development. It's still an entry role, junior researcher, but it was like I was in development, which means I was helping support the teams that kind of come up with the ideas. So development teams, they might go out on location a little bit, or people might kind of, once the idea gets commissioned, they might then move on to that production. But you tend to be kind of more office based. It tends to be kind of more you writing up the ideas and pitching it to commissioners and channels. You might do sizzles, which are quite common now. Sizzles are kind of like trailers, little teasers. You might put that together to bring into a pitch. So that was kind of what I was initially brought to the BBC for, because I had the editing skills to help kind of sizzle edit and help with pitches. I was doing a lot of the visual research. So, you know, a director might write up a treatment and then I would add the pictures, because it's still quite a visual space. A lot of the commissioners don't have a lot of time, so sometimes showing people things, you know, visually rather than paragraphs of like text is a lot easier. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then just helping, like I did a lot of scouring the news, because obviously news can, especially in documentary, can help towards, you know, ideas. So
framing it as well.
Yeah, literally going through all the news outlets and seeing if there's any stories or anything that we want to pick up, or anyone that would be interested in contacting. A lot of things come from that. A lot of things come from, again, looking at different outlets. I spent a lot of time doing research into podcasts. I guess podcasts were just kind of really becoming like a big platform, I would say, when I started at the BBC. So that was really interesting. Just all these kind of extra things. And what people don't realise is that BBC Studios is a independent arm of the BBC. So they're technically an independent company.
Oh, so they don't get funding?
Say that again, sorry?
They don't get funding from the taxpayers?
They don't... They get funding from the BBC because the BBC own them. So when that comes to taxpayers' money, I believe there might be some links. But again, I couldn't really talk on the finances. But it's meant to be seen as an independent arm, meaning that they can pitch to people outside of the BBC. So, you know, they make content for Netflix and Channel 4, all these other places, not just in-house BBC. So that's what an independent company would do. So a lot of television, you will see, even if it's on BBC, you might see, or on ITV, you might see shows like, a good example is Gogglebox, you'll see Channel 4. Channel 4 has commissioned it, but a company called Studio Lambert are the production company who creates Gogglebox. So they are the company that will hire people, they will shoot it, they will find the contributors on, and then that will be sent to the broadcaster. So it's not like Channel 4 sends, like, you know, their in-house team to make that show. So again, a lot of shows tend to be made by independent production companies, but then obviously a lot of shows are also made by the broadcaster. So it just depends. Like the one show is obviously made by BBC, for example. Yeah. It's not outsourced, but then they might have, you know, different shows.
Like it's crazy. It's crazy because if you really pay attention to the credits, you'll see that this happens. You'll see, this production team, you know, Georgia this or something that.
And that's another way, again, like what I would say to people who are interested in getting into television. That's what I did. You know, watch a lot of content, watch a lot of different content, you know, see which stuff that you like, you're interested in on a very simple level. That's probably the first thing to do. See what you're interested in, see what you like, look at the production company, look at who made it, look at the director, look at the commissioner, you know, look at the head of production, all these kind of different things. And it's almost like piecing together a puzzle. And you're like, right, okay, such and such production company makes that, you know, I'm going to watch a bit more of their content, and then you get in contact with them, you know, ask for a coffee, be very kind of like, I think, another kind of like big advice is kind of, I think once you meet these people, it could become quite like a starstruck moment, like, oh my God, they made these big shows, but they can't, it's you know, you might have met them, but it doesn't mean they've got the power to hand you a job, for example. So sometimes it might be more important to kind of like say, okay, well, you know, obviously keep in touch with them and maybe they can mentor you, or ask them to pass you on to people that maybe are more, you know, actually lower down the peg, which sounds like I'm being, I don't know, but they tend to be the ones that actually are doing the hiring or doing the ones that have, like, you know, connections.
Yeah. So would you say networking is like a massive part of being in the industry?
Yeah, it is a massive part, and it can be really exhausting and quite daunting. You know, I have friends, you know, who, for example, work for, you know, big corporations, more in the corporate kind of world or medical world, and they've only had to update their CV maybe 3 times since they've left uni.
Okay.
I probably have to update my CV maybe twice a month.
What?
And more than that. So if I have a job that, for example, is only a week, and then I need another, I'm going to have to put that on my CV. And then, do you know what I mean? All these kind of things. Or if I'm applying for a certain type of role that might be, let's say it's drama, then I have to alter that CV. If I look for a role that might not be assistant producer, but it's a researcher role, I'd have to. So I'm spending a lot of time. You spend a lot of time doing those kind of things, updating your LinkedIn more than the average Joe. All these different things. So it can become quite a lot and a lot to manage. So it's just interesting. It's very different. And I mean, I remember being told when we were younger, like, oh, don't have too many jobs or like too many jobs back to back because that seems suspicious. Whereas like in television, it's almost like, not to say the more jobs you have, but it's like obviously the more credits you have, the more experience you'll have, all those kind of things. So essentially it's very rare for people to have just like the same one job for their whole television career.
I mean, obviously you expect like loads of actors do multiple films, different films, unrelated films. So of course the cast and crew and the directors and producers and the artists are going to be going from job to job as well, because the industry might be big, but it's quite small at the same time.
Yeah, it's a weird one, and I always say that, like, for me, as much as I'm like, had the opportunity to work on amazing things, and kind of at like kind of the assistant producer level amongst in the television side of what I do, I still only kind of feel like I've got a toe in the door. I think that probably has a lot to do with me not coming from necessarily like a background where I've got family or like close friends or relatives who are in the industry, so I've had to work a lot harder to figure out how to sustain myself in said industry. I'm not from a background of creative family members who kind of like I feel like being from a very working class background, sometimes you have to prioritize keeping the lights on. So I'm not in that position of privilege all the time to just be like, right, okay, I'll take a gap here and just think about how I'm going to get to where I'm getting to. So it is quite difficult as as a Black woman trying to navigate myself in these industries. However, I'm just committed to not letting that stop me from doing what I need to do. And I think it's interesting because one of the earliest phrases I was like told by my parents was, as a Black person, you have to work 10 times harder.
I mean, everyone's heard that. I
struggle with it as a concept because I think, again, it really doesn't bode well with setting you up for failure, when failure is going to happen. Failure is something that can be very, it's necessary. It helps you learn, it helps you develop, helps you adapt. But I think when you're kind of maybe it is my literal take of kind of just being like, oh my God, I need to be so perfect. And I need to it was almost like failure is not an option. And when failure does happen, it's almost like you kind of crumble a bit. And I think that it's that element as well. Like for me, I think my viewpoint was like, the more things I'm doing, the more that I can, contribute to, the more active I am. It's almost like the better I'm doing. And I think now I've kind of been like, right, maybe take a step back. I'm probably not going to be the person that abolishes racism. That's, do you know what I mean? That's a big job for somebody. And, being the person I am, born on the same day as Malcolm X, maybe I thought that I could do that. I don't know. So it's all those kind of things, which again, you have to take into realization when, it's predominantly working in the creative field where it doesn't become completely over-consuming. And, it's great to, want to push yourself and have your fingers in many pies and do, 1,000 things to try and, sustain yourself or, just keep yourself afloat in these industries. But I do think sometimes taking a step back is important. It's predominantly for artists or anyone that thinks creatively, like you have to.
Yeah, you have to take some time to reflect.
But I just don't think it's in my nature, and I don't think it's in a lot predominantly Black women's nature where, we're kind of these mantle pieces that, essentially almost in a lot of cases don't really rest or don't really know what the concept of rest is because we do not have the privilege to do so.
You're being counted on by so many people, your family, your husband, the kids, obviously, those pressures.
You're meant to uphold this mantra, and I think that's something that I'm really trying to incorporate at the moment in terms of creativity, because my problem is my brain is always, I have ideas all the time. I can sit here and look at a Coke can and be like, oh my God. And it's like, as someone that is neurodivergent, my brain works differently, and I'm constantly like, I've had sleepless nights where I'm waking up and I'm just jotting down ideas of like creative ideas. Half of them don't go anywhere, obviously, but it's that kind of thing again of like that always churning, which I think is a lot of artists. It's just a catch-22 of, you know, it's great and it's amazing, but then at the same time it's like, how do you rest? Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but yeah. So that was my early stages into getting into film and television, taking kind of like this freelance leap, and I've just been trying to develop myself ever since, whilst also keeping my art practice, so while still trying to, you know, make Yam sculptures and experimental films and facilitate workshops and
trying to do little passion projects when you can.
Exactly, yeah.
Said I wake up every morning, pray to God that I'm fixing up. Hope I'm never slipping up. Hear the money calling, need my peace to start getting up. Feeling like I'm blessed, but it came with a bit of luck. Feeling like you stressed, then the tension starts to fill you up. Need an intermission, yeah, they ain't the same lane as us. Come from different sticks, yeah, they're not the same range as us. They cop the pleas and top of teas, they're not hitting range with us. Keep